Hello and welcome to the very first historic Ubuntu Congress. No, this is the very first Ubuntu show, and the purpose of this very first Ubuntu show is to raise the awareness, to spread the word about the possibility of a national or universal global standard Ubuntu Linux desktop for the masses. Here we are in 2019 and we still don't have a standard. Now we have a laptop standard such as Chromebooks that have done very well, but we're talking about a true standard for a Ubuntu based desktop for the mom and pops of the world that can walk into a store, try it out, take it home, and be satisfied as an alternative to, say, Windows. So that's what we will try to do with these series of Ubuntu shows. My guests tonight are Steve Peppermint Man from Chicago. He uses Peppermint Linux. And from Australia, Vinny Kangaroo Man, he uses something, I don't know what he uses, but hello, Stephen. Hello, Vince. How are you?
Hello, Carmine.
Hi,
Hello,
guys.
Vince.
All right. So on the live shows, we've talked about this before. I think a few months ago we talked about a national standard, calling it maybe the Andromeda desktop or whatever. We'll just stick with Ubuntu. It's well known. They've been around since 2004 or 5. They've proven themselves. It's arguably the most popular Linux operating system in the world. That's debatable, granted. But for me, how can you not recommend any stable system? So we'll stick with Ubuntu because it is well known. I've installed it, tested it, and I think Ubuntu, with a few modifications, extensions, can be quite acceptable for the mom and pop or the new user. Canonical, who owns Ubuntu, has the resources. They have the talent. They're profitable. They know what they're doing. They've trimmed the fat, as it were. There'll be no talk about an Ubuntu phone. They dropped the Unity desktop in favor of GNOME or GNOME, but I believe that the latest GNOME was a GNOME 3. With the proper modification, should be perfectly acceptable for a mom and pop, the normal family. We've talked about a desktop suite price of $400. I think that's the way it should be. That's the way I think it'll sell. Now we can talk in the future about what kind of hardware specs and all that, RAM and all that, the history and the Ubuntu flavors. So for this first one, for this inauguration of the Ubuntu show, why don't we just make this an open chat? It'll be a fairly quick one. And what are your opinions of this? Why don't we start with Steve? Steve, what are your opinions?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, we've constantly talked about how stable Ubuntu is, and I look at all the distributions that are based on it. If it wasn't stable, would all these distributions out there use it? So it's got a solid base. The GNOME desktop is, if I liken it to maybe like your iPhone or Android, the way the drawer comes out and you see the icons on your screen, so it would be familiar to most people. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, Vince?
Yeah, I've only been on full-time Linux for counting 10 months maybe only, but I certainly remember dipping my toes into Linux way back in 2010 when the only really well-known Linux distro was Ubuntu. And so this is, I agree, a really great idea because out of all the distributions, and people talk about too much fragmentation, out of all the distributions that are out there, the only one that does really stand a chance of becoming widely accepted, widely known, is one that already halfway there, Ubuntu. I think we need to start talking baby steps first, though. So, talking about different flavors, talking about different DEs. Let's settle on a distribution first and talk about user interface, DEs a bit later as well. But let's start with baby steps.
My first date with Ubuntu, as it were, was back in 2006. I saw it in a magazine. It says something like, "Are you tired of Windows XP? Try Ubuntu." I was like, "What the freak is Ubuntu?" I tried it. super fast, even back then compared to Windows XP, but it wasn't quite ready for newbies at the time. This is back in '06, but I was tinkering with it over the following years. In 2010, I didn't see enough good newbie channels for Windows users for trying Linux on YouTube back in 2010. So I decided, instead of complaining, do something about it. So the Total OS Today channel was born as a one-stop, I don't know, shop for newbies, maybe as a sanctuary for Ubuntu newbies in the past or Linux newbies before who, you know, maybe they went to a forum and they weren't treated right or asked a question and they were treated with disrespect. That's not what we're here for. So I started the channel, and really it all starts with one man. And I started in 2010 really as more of a hobby, and here we are today. But I think for this to have the possibility of becoming a reality, I can't do it alone. This is not a one-man operation. We all have to spread the word. And then who knows, if enough interest, you know, if we can garner enough interest, the powers that be, investor or investors or Canonical, will say, hey, who is that guy tossed today? And he's got how many people agreeing with him? Now you can see the power of the masses. And I think that's the only way we'll get to see the possibility of a standard or a universal global Linux desktop based off Ubuntu. We have another guest who just chimed in. Benjamin, how are you?
I'm good. Sorry I'm late. Just got the email.
Not a problem.
I'm going to pass the wand on to Ben because I have to step out.
Right. Okay.
So if you guys are still on, I'll catch on, or I'll catch you later.
Sounds good, Steve. Thank
See you
you.
later,
Thank
Steve.
you. Bye.
So Ben, this is the very first Ubuntu show, the meeting of the Ubuntu Congress, as it were. I don't know what we talked about for this. This is more or less an open chat, open forum for various opinions of what you think about this. And then the future shows will go into specifics like the history, Ubuntu flavors, specifications of a desktop, how to market it, and the future, and so on. So what are your general opinions about a national or a universal Linux desktop based on Ubuntu?
I think Ubuntu is the way to go. I think it's very stable. I think if we're going to go with it, we have to... Whoops. Can anybody hear me? Or what the heck?
Go ahead. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I like to mute myself when you're talking, when people talk, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking that Ubuntu is a good way to go because it's stable. I love my Arch, but I wouldn't recommend it for the new user or the average user. And so I think that GNOME is the way to go. I'm not a fan of GNOME, but if it's not flashy, then they're not going to buy it.
Yeah, we had talked about, I think, the GNOME desktop and the latest Ubuntu with a few modifications, a few extensions. I think it's perfectly fine. And I think Canonical can make it where, I know sometimes you install extensions now and may break the system, so they don't recommend you install extensions. But once they have a standard desktop with specific extensions, and I think that should not be a problem. But we were talking about before, people are not going to care if it's based on Ubuntu, Debian, Arch, or Gentoo or whatever. People who buy a Linux machine, I'm not going to say, hey, that's based on Arch, take it back. People who buy Chromebooks, honey, that's based on Gentoo. What's the matter with you? It doesn't work that way. They buy to take it home and they keep it because it works. They won't care it's based on Arch, Gentoo, strawberry cheesecake, strawberry. They won't care. If it works, they'll be happy, and maybe they'll buy another one for the spouse, a Valentine gift, or kids, and that's how the market works. But it has to work. You won't get a second chance to make a good first impression. So if this truly happens, a national Ubuntu desktop, it has to be virtually bug-free out of the box because it's your first time. It is your first time. And if somebody buys a desktop, Ubuntu desktop, they take it home and it's full of bugs, forget about it, right? So it has to work the very first time. Now we can debate in the future how it's going to be marketed and this and that, if it's even possible. But how many years have we heard, oh, maybe this is the year of the Linux desktop? Right? 10 years? More?
I've
a
heard
lot
of
of
that.
a lot of chatter,
I've
but
heard of
forget about it,
every
right?
year. Every year for
Right,
as long as I can remember, it's going to be the year of Linux.
right,
Well, you've touched
and
on a big
yeah,
chicken and egg problem there.
hmm
So, for as long as Linux requires somebody to make a USB, uh, install it to the system themselves, it's never going to work. You do need somebody to just step up, make a machine that's affordable, like you say, cheap, and just runs Linux out of the box. Then you'll get some degree of market penetrance.
how many times? And Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How many times have you downloaded a Linux-based system? And it could be anything: Ubuntu, Mint, Fedora. Oh, it works absolutely great. And to know that people say, "What are you talking about? It sucks," because of the hardware compatibility issue. You won't have that in a standard system. Okay, and that's the problem with Linux. It can be predictably unpredictable. It's great for experimenting. It's great for tinkering. It's great to learn if you're new, like I was a newbie '06, and I took the time and, God knows how many distros I hopped to learn about Linux. But at some point, I was hopping from bug to bug to bug on different systems. A consumer is not going to pay to get bugs. Like if I want bugs, I'll just download them. So I believe there is a market now. How do the powers that be? How do we get their attention? Now, Joe, I know you chimed in. You came in late, but this is just the first show, so it's just like based on opinion and open chat. So, what are your thoughts about a national Ubuntu or a global Ubuntu Linux desktop?
Well, Ubuntu is the name that everybody does recognize when they are familiar with Linux, or I've heard of it, is usually the phrase you'll hear. I think it's much comes back to the discussion that we've had over and over again, is that until it gets marketed and marketed properly,
Right.
and put out there in front of people,
Right.
you're only going to have a select number of people that are going to know about it. I think, I honestly don't know if it's a fair statement when we say about bugs and breaking or whatever. I mean, that's Windows is all of them. All of them, in fairness, have that same issue. You know that. I mean, Max had stuff. My son-in-law uses MacBooks, 2 of them, for his DJ business, and he did an update. They had an OS update, and it bricked his system. He had to literally take it update, not once but twice. So I mean, it happens with all of them. In any event, I think that there's a need for it, and I think that there's a strong possibility in the future you're going to see it. I don't know how soon. My prediction at the end of the year on Biddle was that I said I do think that we're going to see a climb in Linux's market share but that's taking into account all aspects, not just the desktop. I think the desktop's still going to climb like it has. It's going to creep a little bit. But I think that there's other advances in Linux that are being made too right now that many of us don't always see, especially from the enterprise things. But as far as a national, to answer your question long and short, I think it's something that's needed. I do think that it's something that maybe down the road is going to happen, but I don't know that we could ever put a time frame on it. And I know that, like Vince was just saying, well, all you guys were actually saying it, that it's been saying that for years, it's year to desktop. I think part of that was wishful thinking, but I think where Linux now on the desktop has made its biggest stride was when Windows XP went away, because people were a little bit scared, if they weren't on Windows 7 already. I sold a bunch of Linux computers back then. I was converting people over left and right, and then it kind of tapered off. But now, with all this stuff that happens with Windows 10, not that, again, that it's not a horrible operating system. I've said that. It's the business model behind it that everybody has a problem with, and the privacy stuff. I think I see a lot of discussion in a lot of groups, because I belong to a lot of Linux users groups, but I belong to a lot of channels that I monitor, if nothing else, for this because of the tech industry. There's a lot of concern about where Windows is going. Is it going to wind up a subscription someday? Because that's kind of my thought. It's why else would you put an expiration date on it? is it going to break my system while I'm in the middle of something very vital, that kind of thing? Well, it's gotten better with that, but it still hasn't gotten perfect. We still know that happens. We've all had that with it. I'm on Peppermint tonight. This is my permanent desktop now. I finally wiped out my Mate. I never thought I would do that, but
What?
something going on with it.
Get out of here. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, but I had the Peppermint side of things, and at first I kept blaming myself that maybe I was messing with something, but I don't know if that's the case. I don't know. You talk about bugs. I don't know if it's the flat packs that were loaded. I don't know what was causing it, but every time I tried to do an update on things, I told you about that. When even trying to put wine in there, it wanted to take a bunch of packages out. So something got caught in there I couldn't figure out. So what's the easiest thing to do to wipe it out?
You raise a good point. With a standard desktop, with a standard set of talent and the resources eliminated, you would not have that issue of fragmentation or that issue of unpredictability. Now, I've had comments where, well, at least Linux doesn't delete your files like Windows does. Not so fast there. Not so fast. A few years ago, Ubuntu released, I think it was an LTS. I downloaded it, liked it was fast, and one day I was updating, and all my files magically disappeared. It kept my folders. So, I know what happened. First Ubuntu did it, and the micro says, well, I think we can match that, so there you go. But
you need continuity. That's what you're getting at. And you need continuity. And that's the problem. I mean, I love the fact that we have choices of distros that if one doesn't work for you right now, you could try something else, try something else, try something else. But when it comes to marketing to get them on a machine that you want to see sold on a shelf, you've got to have continuity. You've got to have the same uniform, maintained distro that if there are issues, you've got a good support network in place that can fix them right away. And now let's give Linux as a whole credit for that. I mean, unless it's a single maintainer or small little guy that just created his own distro, it's a different story. But for the most part, you have an issue, it gets fixed pretty darn quick.
Yes.
So
well, we've talked about it that Google Chromebooks have proven that a Linux standard, in this case laptops or the Pixelbook doubles as a tablet, we have proven, Google has proven, that a Linux standard can coexist with the freedom of fragmentation as it were, with no threat to the open source community. I mean, I've heard that argument, if you're going to do that, then we'll lose our freedoms. No, it will expand your freedoms, because if more mom and pops use Linux versus, say, the other one, is that a bad thing or a good thing? It gives them a choice. So I think it's better, not worse. Now, it can be debatable why Ubuntu, why not Fedora, or why Linux Mint. I'm cool with that. It just has to work out of the box. When people buy Chromebooks, as I stated, they're not saying, honey, that's based off of Gentoo, take it back. It ain't going to happen. They buy it, they keep it because it works. And, if Canonical or whoever can pull it off, it will sell. But you got to have it ready to go immediately, no bugs or virtually no bugs. You need a spokesperson. You need the right price that we talked about, $400. It doesn't have to be a turbo beast of a machine. It just has to work. And you have to show the customer, this is what you've been using. Let's update it. Now, let's see how long that takes. Now, this is Ubuntu. Let's update. Let's do a comparison and see what happens. I think that'll work. Will we ever see it? I don't know. When I started my channel, as I was saying back in 2010, it's a one-man operation, and that's fine. But something like this, if we're ever going to see the chance, I can't do it alone. No one person can do it alone. It really does take the community, us, people, humanity towards others. That's what Ubuntu means, to spread the word. Get it out there. Get the people involved, engage, raise the buzz around it. And the people who have the power, the investors, the entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, they will take notice if they see people talking about it, because dollar signs flash in their head, in their eyes. That's the engine that I guess drives the economy, is the people who have the vision, kind of like Steve Jobs. So that's where we're at. I think it's time. There are many flavors of Ubuntu. I use Ubuntu Mate and others I've tried. Right now I use Ubuntu Mate. I have Ubuntu on my other system. And I enjoy both. I use Windows 10 as my backup. That's how much better that Linux has gone since I first had a date with Linux back in '06. Benjamin, we'll let you close it out. What are your final thoughts here?
Well, I'm thinking that if Ubuntu does pull this off and we get a national desktop, it's going to have to take some notes from Apple. And in the sense that, and hear me out on this, it's going to sound bad, but hear me out on this, because there's not a lot of hardware. There's some hardware that is incompatible with Linux, or it's a pain in the butt to get it to work with it.
Yeah.
And I think that they're going to have to take a note from Apple in the sense that they're going to have to control the hardware that Linux goes on, and to make sure that it's all going to work. Because if you put, like, let's say a Broadcom chipset in a laptop, that's going to be a pain in the butt to get Linux to work no matter what distro you're on. NVIDIA could be a pain in the butt. It took me a week to get this one to work. And so, like, I think that they need to have at least some control over the hardware to make sure that it just clicks. It just works.
And that would be done. That would be done in the development phase, the pre-testing phase, the testing phase. I mean, I know it takes time, resources, talent, money, but I think, and that's all normal. But I think it can be done. You have a sweet spot machine of $400. It doesn't even have to have built-in wireless, but it just has to work. You know what I mean? People take it home, they boot it up, boom, it's there. Do an update. Oh, it takes only 60 seconds versus 2 hours with Windows. That ain't bad, honey. You see how this works? One nice word leads to another.
Can I comment on that a second?
Yeah.
In fairness, though, okay, think about something. Apple, the Mac OS is built off of Unix, which is Linux. What it comes down to, long and short of this, is money. And when have you ever seen, which is happening more and more hardware peripheral manufacturers, whether it's NVIDIA, whoever, starting to support open source now and support this? Comparing to what was, it's not a fair. I don't feel it's a fair thing to say that you got to take a clue from Apple. I think what it is these manufacturers need to be supportive of Linux and actually build their hardware to work with it. It's not just about Linux trying to work with what's out there. It's got to work both ways.
It's got to be a marriage. Yeah.
Right. You got to have hardware that's. How many times you say, "Well, I could buy this printer, but is it supported by Linux drivers or supported that way?" And there's been more support for these distros now than there's ever been. I mean, 10 years ago, would you have seen even what you've got right now? So I think that now that they can see that in these hardware companies, that they can see that they could start monetizing some of this in some format, is one of the reasons why you're seeing some of this. And then let's face it, open source is still a better platform to have your hardware working off of. I mean, it truly is. It works better, than keeping stuff locked out. If you got open minds with this, and contributors for it, it's like the best of both worlds.
Think about this. Suppose Canonical or ABC Company makes the machine, the Ubuntu desktop. It's $400, 4 gigs of RAM, basic, 120 gig S, nothing fancy, but no bugs. Or virtually no bugs. It works the way it was. It's super fast, easy to use, no reboots or seldom reboot. Bam, bam, bam. The parents are happy. Now the kid says, well, yeah, but like, what about gaming? If the parents see a quality product, they would have no problem jumping from 400, say, to 800 or more for a gaming Linux machine. And there's going to be more profit in that. No problem, because they've seen it. They've touchy-feely, they know. It's not a con. Toss Today was in line, or ABC channel was in line, or whatever. It does work because they have it. That would be no problem. So the profit margin probably at some in the beginning may be low, but it's the power of the internet. Like if I was a newbie, I bought a machine, Ubuntu, man, I'm going to tell my friend, I'm going to tell Joey or Steve or Paulie, the word spreads, man. That's the power of the web. But if it sucks, it's all over. No chance to come back. It's done.
But from a PC builder standpoint, too, there's not a lot of quote-unquote profit made on the machine. It's the support where you make your money. It's the, where Microsoft and others are making it as apps and add-ons and all this other stuff. It's not the initial machine where it's being made,
Right.
the money. So,
And we could talk about that on a future podcast about the
Yeah.
marketing and the specs and the flavors and the future and the politics and all that. But I think we'll end this for this first meeting of the Ubuntu Congress, as it were. Hopefully, this will not shut down next month. You know, but I wanted to thank all my guests here: Benjamin, Joe, Steve, and Vinny from Australia. Maybe there'll be an Australian Ubuntu with the little kangaroo symbol in front, because it's so fast it hops. Okay, it's a bad commercial.
Good one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Yes. So I think we'll wrap it up for this one. So look, let's spread the word. No one person can do it alone. I can. Those of you who watch this later, spread the word if you think it's worth it. I think so. And then we'll just go from there. You know, so on that note, I will end this, and I will catch everybody on the Ubuntu show number 2. And on that one, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the history of it and, you know, where it came from. Well, it came from planet Earth, obviously, but no. We'll just go from there. So on that note, I'll say arrivederci and let's rock with Linux. So ciao.
Thank you, Carmine. Good night, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right.
Goodbye.
All right.